Hi everyone, welcome to the MBN Boston Data Podcast. This episode, our topic is around maximising the value of your data. Today I'm joined by James Miller, Data and Digital Transformation Director at Anmut. James has got over 25 years experience in the data space. He's led data teams and built propositions at FTSE 50, 100 and 250 organisations, as well as startups. He's worked with data pioneers Edwina Dunn, Clive Hunby at their startup StarCount, where he focused on data transformation and leading several groundbreaking data strategies. He's also worked with companies such as Into as their first data leader before working as an interim CDO and then supporting the growth of data strategy specialists Carruthers and Jackson. In this episode, James is going to cover how to maximize the value of data by touching on topics such as data as a critical asset, the strategic role of data, challenges in the valuation of data, investment barriers, competitive advantages, and strategic approaches. James, right, thanks for joining me. Obviously, we're off to a good start today. That was quick. There was no extra takes took there at all. But it's been a long time coming. I know we've been talking over the last year or so, probably more. You've been instrumental in some of our data leadership events and adding a lot of value at those events too. And I thought, well, we've had a few chats now. Might as well bring you on board as a guest. So I want to get straight to it. As we've just stated, then you've got a storied career in data, and I'm keen to find out what you're up to recently, and I'm sure our listeners are as well too. And what's currently brought you to your current employer, Anmut, as well too.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Josh, and thanks for having me. And I said long time coming. Yeah, I've probably known you for a couple of years now, I suspect, actually, conversations, what have you. So good to be here, and always happy to talk. If anyone sees my kind of content on LinkedIn, you can tell I'm one of those, right? So I do like to chat. Yeah. So as I said, good to be here, and I've been dwelling on my career recently because I kind of reached a milestone of about 25 years in data, and that kind of gives anyone pause for thought. I started my first job back in 2000. Actually, I had jobs before that, to be fair, so I'm properly aging myself. But I started in commercial roles in retail, but I quickly moved over into analytics back in the days when you only had one analyst in any given company, really. So you kind of did everything. Very different world to what we're in at the moment. You're the data architect, the analyst, the engineer. You went to the board to tell them your insights, to kind of convince them to spend their money and so on. So quite an interesting kind of upbringing in the early days, I think, of kind of data meaning something for organisations. And so over that time, I've done lots of things. I spent about 10 years now, I would say, in sort of data leadership roles, so working inside clients. I set up a really early analytics and data team at Dixon's, which is now Currys, and that was, we're talking way back in 2006 or something now, so quite a while ago. Spent a good period of time at Experian as well as a consultant. So I've kind of got a real mix, about 15 years in consultancy, 10 years client side, so I'm officially a consultant, as much as that would have frustrated the old version of me. Would never believed I'd be saying that. But there you go. So I'm leaning into it. So I think big part of what my career has been around has been, I suppose, evangelizing about data, really trying to make it work for organizations. And I think because I started life in sort of analytics and data science, I've always been close to what I'd call the value in the business end. So in the sense that I could see the decisions being made based off the kind of stuff that me and my teams were doing. And I've always loved that, because I'd be able to see the real impact of data. But what happened probably about midway through my career was I'd started to look back down the chain at all the data. So you think about data management and data governance and so on, and I used to ignore that, by the way, like any bad analyst would have done in the past. But realizing that, everything that we were doing in terms of making decisions in the organization that I was at depended on this data being right, depended on it being fit for purpose. So it got me into thinking about data strategy. How do we transform the data in an organization? So I spent quite a lot of time focused on kind of building out what I'd call strategic and operational capabilities for data. So people, processes, tech, all that kind of stuff in organizations. So very much kind of data and digital, to be fair. And I've done that inside organizations as kind of data leader, but I've spent a lot of time helping people do it as well through data strategies. And through that time, I became quite obsessed actually with business value. Like, how do we really make data work? Because I've seen so many, I suppose, data transformations not hit their mark. They do change, they do create change for organizations, but a lot of that kind of big bang transformation stuff, which is slightly less in vogue these days for good reasons, kind of fizzles out. We end up buying a big bit of technology and it doesn't quite work for us because we forget to think about our people. We forget to think about our processes. And ultimately, I realized, well, we're forgetting to think about the value of our data, right? We're actually trying to fix too much. We're not prioritizing. So I've been obsessed with that for years, and I've been, working on strategies where we actually, cut away some of this chaff around the data and focus on what matters. And that's kind of what brought me to Anmut. So Anmut's a data transformation organization. And Anmut is a really interesting business because it focuses on data asset management. And it's all about how do we manage our data as a valuable asset. So it's a slightly different mindset, I think, to where data's been. And it's starting to, think about how do we actually treat data as an asset like any other asset. And it's all about prioritization, all about value. So we're working with lots of organizations, really helping them to understand the value of their data assets so they can then use that to drive their transformation in a much more nuanced and prioritized way, and ideally get that business value we want in a leaner and slicker way. So I kind of feel like I've found a home in Anmut, which I've been brewing up for the past 20 years, really.
I mean, in terms I've not obviously been in industry as long as yourself, probably just under half. But what I've seen over the years is, you see organisations that actually don't, or in the past didn't value data the same way. And I completely agree with you in regards to 10 years ago, 12 years ago or so, you could just be an individual with an organisation and you're the data person for that business, and everything runs into that functionality. And it has changed significantly. I think if you don't think data is part of your organisation, or crucial part of your organisation, should I say, then you're probably in the wrong environment. Don't think a single business I work with, obviously I work in data, so it doesn't value it. Obviously value it at the very top of the tree. But my first question to you would be, how can data be valued like other elements within an organisation? What specifics would you focus on within that environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because this is kind of the crux of it, really, because I'll step back slightly just a second, because the reason we want to value it is because we want to invest in it the right way. And that's been the big problem with data strategies and transformation and data in general, is we've tried to fix too much and we've not really ended up fixing enough, or we're fixing the wrong things. And a lot of organizations, I think, have been quite tired of strategies and transformations around data, as I said, because they're not hitting their mark, because they're not prioritized. And really what this is about is helping us, think about data, not just as a cost, but as a benefit. And often what happens is organizations tend to see data and data management as really as a cost of doing business. And that doesn't give it it's not a particularly inspiring story, right? And it's been quite hard to sell it. Now, by putting an asset into this, so, data management, putting the asset into it, so data asset management, what we're doing there is we're actually saying, well, no, let's look at the benefits of this, and let's actually make them concrete benefits so we can actually invest for returns, so we're investing in the right place. So when it comes to the technology we need, all those data platforms that people love buying, all the people, the literacy programs, all of the actual, the data, the doing of the data itself. So, how do we actually sort out quality and governance and stuff? That all costs. It's all effort, it's all resources, it's time, it's budget, it's it's effort. So this is all about building that equation out. So we've got cost and benefit. But the way to see, I think, data as an asset is that in many ways, if you think a lot of organizations talk about, and people say, yeah, data's an asset. You hear it all the time, but I don't actually think they necessarily know what that actually means, right? Because you could say asset, you could say something's an asset because we feel it's beneficial. And I think that's what most people say. But when I'm talking about asset here, what I'm actually saying, it's a material asset. And that means if it's an asset, it's got value, and that value can be measured. So if you think about the assets that any organization is dealing with, like normally we're thinking about tangible assets, right? Kind of a real estate, I'm saying buildings, even the furniture within your organization, that's all tangible, right? That's the stuff that CFOs understand. You can touch it. Data's a bit different. We can't touch data. It's digital. But if you, I mean, I won't go into super detail in terms of kind of the accounting side. But if you think about data, it meets all the tests to be an intangible asset, right? It has economic value, but it doesn't have any physical form, right? It meets all of those tests. So when you look at it in that respect, you go, well, yeah, this is an asset like any other asset we've got. And what do you want from an asset? You want to create value through its use. And that's the sort of fundamental principle here. I mean, data's different because, physical assets like land, for example, you can't keep using it and expecting returns from it. With data, you can. You can copy it, like in theory, infinitely, right? So it behaves a little bit differently to a normal asset. But the point is, it is an asset. And I think if you look at organizations and you look at, say, it's a great stat for the S&P 500, kind of that index. And about 90% of the value of the organizations within that is intangible, right? So we've moved from a world where the assets of organization are mostly tangible, stuff you can touch. Because we've, in a digital economy now, the vast majority of them are intangible. And you think about 90% of an organization's value is intangible, then a big chunk of that's going to be data. So you as an organization, you're going to want to understand what that value means to you. Now, I think a lot of people then get into the place where saying, well, the problem here is that CFOs don't want to stick this on the books, right? They don't want to stick this on the balance sheet. And that's right, because the thing about data is it is a little bit abstract in a sense, and kind of the accounting world don't like any of that. They don't like any ambiguity, right? So it's there are a few examples where data has made it onto the books. China, for example, now there are rules there that data can get on the balance sheets. It's the only place in the world. There are some other examples around the world where things like customer data lists have got onto the books. But fundamentally, it's kind of a bit of a red herring, because your data is valuable to you, but it might not be valuable to the next organization, right? So it's not necessarily tradable. Okay. Some of it is, but it might not be. But that doesn't mean it's not an asset. It still means it's got value to you in the way you use it. So what this all means is it's almost crazy, really, that if you look at an organization and the way they think about their assets, that they, I'm being a bit facetious here, but they kind of know the value of the toilet rolls, right? They've got in their offices, roughly speaking, but they don't know about the data. They don't know don't know its value, and it's so vital to decision making and action taking, isn't it? So that's what excites me here. Is like we get into really understand that value of that data, we can invest in it properly, and we can make better decisions.
I think you've made a really good point there in regards to data value and data benefits. I think if you were to, show a senior leader, C-suite board member what you do and are able to, as a consultant, I would imagine you'd be able to explain complex analytical methodologies in a simplistic manner, or to non-technical stakeholders. I'm sure you do that a lot. They'll see the benefit, but there's a difference between benefit and value. So why do you think that is? What's the major difference between data value and benefits of using data?
Yeah, it's an important point, this, because we all talk about benefits. So, and I've done this throughout my career, what I've always tried to do is talk to the board and say, here are the benefits, X, Y, Z of us doing whatever in data. So we might say, look, listen, I'm going to invest in our customer. We need to invest in our customer data because we know customer acquisition is a key objective of the organization. There's a key benefit of that. We know that our customers are probably worth about £40 million a year to us or whatever. That's kind of, it's high level. And I think what benefits for me are, they're largely situational. They're often expressed in a kind of short-term basis. And I found no matter how much in the past I've explained the benefits of sort of data use cases, data initiatives to the board, yes, they get it conceptually, but fundamentally we're missing something here, missing measurement and value. The difference between benefits and value is value is measurable. Benefits are not really. They're kind of narrative. They're situational, as I mentioned. So difference here is that value. What we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what value is your data to your organization, and that's measurable, right? And in its value in use. So if you think about your activities in your organization, they've got a greater or lesser dependency on data. And the value comes from, I suppose, the magnitude, the degree of dependency your organization is on data. So if you look at any organization, this gets complex really fast, right? Even in smallish organizations, they'll have customer data, they'll have product, location, operational, marketing data, loads of buckets of data. And all of those are feeding use cases. They're feeding activities, and they're feeding kind of functions like marketing or trading or whatever it might be. But what you're trying to do with value is you're actually trying to say, well, let's work backwards. Let's start with a business and say, business, what you're trying to do. And mostly we're trying to grow our revenue. We're trying to improve our productivity, which is mostly about dealing with costs. And we're trying to improve ourselves on a risk basis, right? There's kind of three kind of big buckets that are kind of going on. Now, underneath each of those, though, you've got value drivers. So if you think about marketing, for example, one of the key outcome of marketing, grow revenue, right? that we'll get that. Those value drivers that sit underneath marketing might be acquire more customers, retain more customers, do some cross-sell or upsell. Those are the kind of levers that we pull in order to drive that revenue. Now, a whole load of marketing activities sit behind that. That could be things like digital advertising. It could be, if you've got a store, if you run into a store chain, it could be in-store promotions or a loyalty program or whatever. And then a load of use cases sit beneath that. So things like customer segmentation and all the stuff, we do as analysts and data people, kind of bringing the data together. And at the very base of all of this, you've got your data. Now, what we're trying to do is trace a line, right? Streams from that value through to that data. And what you'll find is that there's lots of slices. So your customer data has lots of different slices of value that it's attached to in your organization. And what valuation is trying to do is essentially the methodology, which I won't go through, well, I won't reveal all, but fundamentally at a high level, what the methodology is doing is basically saying, look, my company is producing, let's say, a turnover of £40 million per annum. I want to understand the degree to which data is driving those decisions. And you might follow those value streams back and say, well, actual fact, that customer data is driving £20 million worth of this sort of decisions and actions that we're taking. And what you get at an enterprise level is a ratio. Half of my, essentially half of what I'm doing is driven by data. Now I'm putting it in a really crude way. But fundamentally beneath that, you can go down to a use case level and start to actually understand the degree to which one of your vital use cases is dependent on different types of data. How does that connect through to value making for your business? And that value doesn't have to be fair. It's not just financial, by the way. It could be social. It could be environmental. It's the same principles apply. But the point is to be able to measure it. So you can basically say, okay, I've got a use case. as a data leader, you can say, I've got a use case for my data. I know I need customer data is, I can see the benefit. I can see the benefit of using that customer data to drive decisions. My CFO, my board have got a number. That means that I can now start thinking about my costs with that equation of benefit versus cost. And then I can start to invest with my eyes open. Or I could think, I've got a bit of a portfolio here of use cases, because I can start to see the value that my data's actually connected to, and the potential costs I might have to, for example, to make my data actually fit for purpose, for example, data management. I might decide, you know what, I'm going to deprioritize all these things that I've been doing because they're not actually worth it in the grand scheme of things. There are other things that are more important to me. And it's kind of a portfolio management way of looking at life, really, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. What, in your opinion, and it might not be an answer to this, but I'm curious, what industries, not companies specifically, but what industries do you think are doing well in this space in terms of data valuation? Is there anyone leading the front in terms of an industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I think it's new. What's really fascinating about this whole area is that the thinking is not new. Asset thinking is as old as the hills, right? It's this is kind of economics, but the application of this to data is definitely new and emerging. Now, data management is old as the hills as well, and this is just data management, which is very explicitly focused on value measurement. Right, it's still data management. We still have to do the things we do in data management, which is make data fit for purpose, manage the life cycle of data. All that stuff still happens. But this is just meaning that we can prioritize more effectively. But I'd say some of the organizations that we work with that have got here fastest are actually those that are used to thinking about assets, interesting enough. So organizations which are holders of big physical assets get it. I mean, the example which I can talk about is national highways. So we've done a lot of work with national highways in recent years, and one of the first things we did for them was actually value the data. Now, national highways, they look after the strategic road network. So, in physical terms, they look after billions of pounds of worth of physical assets. Now, all of the decisions about where to put those assets, those roads, how to manage traffic, how to deal with safety, they all rely on data and information, to make those decisions. So they're all of critical importance. And we assessed that their data contributes to about £60 billion worth of their entire assets. That's about 50%. So what you're essentially saying is, because we're kind of tracing the dependency of the business's value on its data, and we're saying that basically you can draw a pretty straight line in many different streams, but a straight line between the data and those decisions is about 50% of your overall value as an organization. You're talking £60 billion. That's an enormous amount. And what that then says, right, you know what? Are we investing in the right way? And if you break that down to use cases, you can start doing what I just said. Actually, this is more important than this one, because we can start to invest in this use case. We can buy this technology. And I mean, this piece of work showed that the data was 15 times more valuable than National Highways IT systems, right?
Right.
And all of that investment. I think it's useful for any organization can do that. And at Anmut, we have worked with consumer organizations, the organizations that are concerned about the customer life cycle and valuing the data that goes through that.
Yeah.
We've worked with finance, we've worked with various government departments. I think those that kind of own and run critical infrastructure, they get it more implicitly. But to be fair, this can apply to any organization. That's the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before as well about China and how they obviously put emphasis on the value of data. Why, in relation to the cost of an organization or the price of an organization, Why is the West not doing that? Is there any specific reason why they're not evaluating it as much?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I've got a great answer, but I think we're getting there. I think what's happened though, there's been a lot of the early conversations around this were, well, why is data not on your balance sheet, as I was talking about earlier? And okay, in China, they've made a decision to do that, which is very forward thinking. I think we've got, financial, I suppose, rules and practices that we're very used to, which see the world in a certain way, and make a key difference between tangible and intangible assets, and so they don't want any ambiguity. So I think that's been one of the challenges. But I tend to think, well, you know what? In some ways, it's a bit of a red herring, and I think that's held up some of this a little bit. In actual fact, you put that aside and say to an organisation, and we have conversations with CFOs all the time, and once they kind of get beyond but I can't put this on my balance sheet, right? Because I can't report this. Okay, you don't have to. But what would be great is for you as a leadership team to actually understand what the value means to you, because this is kind of your data is often your secret sauce, right? You don't want anyone necessarily to know that anyway. Yeah. It's a competitive advantage for you to know, not necessarily anyone else. So we're getting there, and I think a key, I would say, just sort of tangentially to this, the CFO is a really important stakeholder in this conversation, and I think CFOs and the board are always important stakeholders for data leaders. But what I found as a data leader, I would hit brick walls. So I'd build what I thought was a good case for investing in a data strategy. Whatever it might be, I might be buying a bit of kit, right? And I might be employing more people, putting some effort into some projects. But I would hit the CFO room, and they would just say, "Okay, right, I've got competing needs, right? Other people want my money," and you'd have to tell a very good story, as we mentioned about benefits. And if we were, it's not quite as bad as this, but the CFO's in a good mood and we're a good part of the cycle, I might get my money or I might get part of it. But what we're finding here is that, and I was speaking to some CFOs recently, they see the world very simply. They just want to be able to see the investment case. And then, because they're protecting value and creating value for the stakeholders of their organization. Now, what this kind of strategic data asset management does, it provides that clarity and that visibility around our data and our business cases for data. And those CFOs feel a hell of a lot more comfortable about what they're investing in. Now, you, as a data leader, you've now given yourself some metrics to measure yourself against, right? But I think we need that. Quite often, data hasn't necessarily had those metrics. You might have metrics saying, I'm going to improve my data quality by X, but what does that actually mean in terms of value to the organization? And this is where the asset management comes in. So, yeah, long-winded answer to your question. I think we're getting there. And, that's why we kind of see ourselves as kind of a bit activist here as well. We're kind of there's some education going on. And once you actually get into this conversation, people are like, yeah, this makes absolute sense. This is the way we need to be doing this. And that's what brought me into Anmut, because it's an organization that's, I think, generally doing something very different and something well needed. But there's a journey ahead though, Josh, I'd say. You've got plenty of work to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm all for this, like putting data at the forefront of a balance sheet. Okay, yeah, you're right. There's the secret sauce there that you don't want to let your competitors find out, but it's protecting jobs and protecting data professionals. And obviously, with the recent tech layoffs, I think there's some of these organisations had to do it out of necessity and whatever reasons. We're not going to get involved in that, but I think already we're seeing a huge rebound in terms of hiring in this space, and maybe mistakes have been made where they've hired and fired a team of data professionals and realised, look, we can't do without these people. So there's expensive mistakes already happening. So I think what you're doing, and I think what the industry's doing in this space and data valuation is going to be very beneficial for the wider community, not just the consultancy space. You mentioned very briefly business of data, and I know we've talked about this recently. What does that mean, business of data? What's it mean for data leaders specifically as well too?
Yeah, this is probably me. And anyone listens to anything I say on LinkedIn, I'm always going about the business of data. And to be honest, the business of data really is very shorthand, kind of, I suppose, a dummies version of what we do at Anmut. So I was talking about data asset management. Well, it fundamentally is a business of data. And what I'm talking about there is how do we make sure that data is a business activity? It doesn't necessarily mean that data has its own P&L. It could in some circumstances. In many ways, data doesn't want a different P&L from the organization, because data, in my mind, is there to serve the organization, right? So why would you have a different P&L unless you're selling your data and you're licensing it? And that's a different kettle of fish. It's data valuation again, by the way. It's just a different form. But in many ways, business data is about how do you operate as a business activity, as a data function, as a data leader with the rest of the business. And a lot of data functions, yes, they've got a budget, but that budget has come to them because the various lines of business that they work with, like marketing or whatever, they ever play a big part in that, right? Because they need that, then they need the help from data to be able to do the things that they want. So ultimately, really, the kind of the P&L side sits elsewhere, because a marketing team, for example, which the data team is informing, well, they're on the hook for the benefit, right? So that means they're on the hook for costs as well. So when I'm talking about the business of data, it's really about how we actually bring data and the business together. And when I was talking earlier, I was actually talking about really something, the business value chain. So we've kind of got, at the one end, we've got all the things like revenue and so on. As I mentioned, we've kind of got the value drivers that inform that. We've got the activities beneath that. We've got all those use cases, and then we've got the data. Now, it's really about, for me, about bringing two mindsets together. We've got a data mindset, which I've had a data mindset for years, about how do we make our data sort of fit for purpose? How do we make it consumable? How do we make it fit ready for decisions? But it's really properly bringing it and connecting it to the business. So I would say it's shorthand for what I've just been describing. And I'm looking to my notes here because there's kind of five things that I think this kind of encapsulates. So first off, kind of 5 principles for me around this. And it kind of describes, as I mentioned, data asset management quite simply. But number one is what I just mentioned. You need to connect your data to your business value chain. That's like number one. That's 101 stuff, because that helps you start to prioritize that. And I actually mean more than aligning data. So we often hear about, you've got to align your data to the business. Well, that's quite passive. I actually think you have to connect it, because there are value streams from data to outcomes. It's actually about connection. So that's the first bit. The second part of this is, okay, you connect data to the value it generates, or it drives, or it has a part in creating. The next job is you actually need to treat data as an asset, right? So you actually then need to say, well, what value is that data? It's an asset. And because it's an asset, I have to protect it, which is a big part of data management anyway. But I protect it for value. I make it fit for purpose of value. So all that data quality stuff and conditioning we will talk about, there's no point in just doing that to all of your data unless you know what you're shooting for, right? And that's a very obvious thing to say, but it gets missed in lots of data strategies because that connection to the business is kind of missing, or it's not strong enough. Let's put it that way. The next stage for me is the next kind of principle is you actually need to think about those data use cases that you're using your data for, whatever it might be. I mean, I'm from a kind of marketing type background, so a customer segmentation is a nice use case for data. But what you need to do is you need to actually flip the language into business case. So you've got a use case. Yeah, that's great. And we collect information on use cases as data people the whole time. We go, what data do I need to do this? What technology do I need? What people do I need? How am I going to measure it? All that stuff, which is all great. But you also need to flip that, as I said, into a business case, because what you're actually asking your business is you're saying, I need to invest into making that segmentation, in this example, happen. And that means I need to understand the value that is aligned to. So the degree my business is dependent on it, and I'll put a value on that. And what cost is it to me, right? Is that segmentation going to break the bank, or is it something I can invest in iteratively over time or whatever? So there's a real nuance here about use cases becoming business cases. So it's thinking about prioritization of investment. I mean, the other principle I'd say about this is, if you think about all your use cases, and I mentioned this earlier, if you think about it from a portfolio perspective, you've got a whole lot of activities and initiatives that are on they're your deck of cards, right, as a data leader. Now, data strategies traditionally are quite static, and you'd have all these use cases, and you wouldn't, they're kind of almost there forever, or they feel like it. The whole principle here is, if you're tying those use cases to value, as the context of your business changes, what it's measuring changes, its ambitions change, maybe it wants to focus less on customer acquisition and move to customer retention. That has a knock-on impact to that deck of cards you've got, your use cases. So if you treat it like a portfolio, you can basically say, right, you can lay them out and go, okay, I can see the benefits and the costs of each of these use cases. Now, as my business changes, the benefits might become potentially more, potentially less. It might become more costly or less costly. And then you move stuff in and out. And that's my approach these days to a data strategy in general, is treat it like a business portfolio, an asset portfolio, really. I suppose the last principle really is, okay, I've said a lot there about being more business-minded, more, I suppose, commercially minded about your data. You've got to lead it as a business. And this places a really interesting emphasis on data leaders in particular, who are often in the weeds, right, with the guts of technology and working out where our AI fits at the moment, and kind of worrying about data quality. And these are all important things you need to worry about. But this is about ensuring that you're commercially focused as well. And what I love about it, and I've always said that data execs particularly are one of the few groups of people in an organization who need a holistic understanding of the whole business, because data is affecting it everywhere. And what this kind of means is this making this connection very clear between value and data. You've got to really know your business, right? You've got to know it. You've got to have a holistic view, and you've got to be detailed. So that portfolio of use cases, just mentioned as initiatives, that requires some detailed knowledge about how your business operates. So that changes to me. That makes our data leaders what they actually truly need to be, as business leaders who lead data. And it also means actually that your business leaders need to have a decent view of data as well. And they don't need to be technical, but if they start to understand that data is a tangible asset and a measurable and a properly measurable investment, that actually makes it easier for business leaders to, stop seeing data as something that's abstract and a bit scary and don't quite understand it.
Yeah.
Right? It puts it into the language of the business.
Yeah, I think you've summarised that really well. I think going through the benefits, going through your process and the organisation's methodology is really beneficial. Not that I'm negative, but I want to find out what the challenges are, because they're always fun. Because I think, from my perspective, from a talent perspective, when it comes to hiring data professionals, sometimes if you're hiring into organizations or teams that may not have a data professional already there, or don't really know what they're looking for and are giving you a unicorn brief, it can cause a lot of issues down the line. So I'd imagine from a consultancy perspective, when it comes to evaluating data, there's certain organizations that might not be the most perfect client to work with, and you need to go through some hurdles. So I'll rephrase it. I mean, what specific challenges would you associate with value in data? Don't need to name names or anything like that, but obviously some examples would be good.
No, it's not. It's a great question, because this is an involvement really of something we've always been doing, right? And I mean, I've had a few run-ins, actually, people on LinkedIn who think I'm having a pop at data management. I'm not saying it's we're reinventing it. It's a framing. It's a framing piece. It's an emphasis, and it's an emphasis on value. And that's not what all data management is about. But fundamentally, I would also question, said, well, why are you focused on data quality of something if you're not actually focused on the outcomes, right? What's the point? Okay. And I get myself in trouble sometimes with some of that stuff. But, when it comes to the organizations, yeah, it can be challenging. And that's why those that are, I suppose, get it faster, as I mentioned, are those that are used to dealing with assets in general, because it's an asset thinking mindset. I go, okay, that makes a lot of sense straight away. But I've had lots of conversations with organizations, sort of digital organizations, who maybe think, they're not dealing with physical assets, and they get it as well. It's fundamentally a mindset. It's like mindset change, I think, that's required. And I think I encounter organizations that feel they might not be kind of ready to think like this, it's because it's requiring a bit of a mental mindset shift. Really, it's from, people do have a kind of, I suppose, a folk history of data not necessarily living up to its promise, feeling a bit like a bit of technology that's not quite worked for them, being a bit difficult to understand. Like you say, hiring unicorns, and I've been one of those before, at least more than once. And it's a lonely place to be, right? You're expecting one person to solve it all, when in actual fact you need a business to solve it all, right? Not one person. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of, I suppose, let's stop thinking that by dropping one data leader in, or someone, or a great engineer, for example, they're going to resolve this all overnight. That's been the problem this all along. It's about this being a business activity. So there is a leap, and it's not a leap of faith, because this makes sense to organizations when it's explained to them, and when they see it, and when they actually see, if you take a use case and go and make this work, all right, okay, I totally understand that. So like with any new way of thinking, it's best to start small. I think those challenges are really around mindset. The challenges there around, oh my God, is this going to cost me more? Right? Is this another strategy? And I err away actually from talking about data transformation a little bit, although it's in my job title. What we're trying to do here is not shoehorn data strategy into a business strategy. What we're trying to do here is actually create a data-enabled business strategy. And all of this takes a little bit of time to people to get their head around, when they're kind of used to buying technology and hoping that will solve a problem, or buying people and hoping that will solve a problem. So, yeah, culture, I suppose, Josh, is the thing, isn't it? That's always a challenge.
I think so. I think I couldn't agree more. I think culture is the key for this one. I think if people are open-minded and they're open to suggestion and maybe listening to an expert and taking that advice on, not always having to implement it, but just maybe listening. I think it's any consultant, I think that's the dream client, so to speak, isn't it, really? If they just work with you as a peer level. I'm sure we've both been in those situations where we've been looked down on in the past. But no, I agree. I think it's applicable. It's applicable in many different industries there too. So my next question, I want to get to data transformation in a bit, but because I've got an issue with that. But before that, I mean, in terms of advice to people going into this data valuation piece, and what advice do you have for organisations or individuals starting data valuation projects for their organisations?
Yeah, it's again another question, and I suppose the advice, probably the sort of advice you probably hear a lot, but it's the right advice. It's about actually starting small. So you can come at this in a number of different ways. You could, if you so wish, you could say, just value all the data in my organisation, and I want that ratio. I've got £1 billion business or $1 billion business. I want to understand the degree to which that's dependent on data, so I can value that data. And I might say that data is worth £200 million, right? Now you can do that. We call that an enterprise data valuation, and it's something we do. Organizations that are kind of looking after strategically important assets love that approach, because they can start to actually say, we do something very important. we need to understand our data at this big level, and then you can start to go in and start to work out how you can actually fix the gap, because you do that valuation, but it doesn't necessarily mean your data is good enough to create that value. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to, we call it viability, but it's improving the quality and so on of the data. Other organizations, and this is a really interesting one, particularly in the kind of private equity space and the kind of acquisitions and sort of M&A and what have you, they're quite interested in understanding the value of an organization's data when they're looking to buy or sell a company. And that's becoming a really interesting area as well. But fundamentally, those two aside, most organizations, I'd say they're in somewhere between the operational mindset, so they're trying to make data work more effectively for them, or they're in the transformation mindset. And obviously the transformation mindset really isn't a constant thing. It tends to happen in the moment. People suddenly realize they need to do something big, right? But we kind of deal with organizations there. And the advice always is that this is about demonstrating the value to your organization. So start somewhere small. You can start with one use case. You can take one element of what your organization does, and you can do everything I just described there, really, about kind of that whole chain, that value chain piece, but do it in microcosm. Now, whilst you're doing that, you'll probably find that, in actual fact, the data that you're looking at for that use case is actually informing lots of other different use cases. And because these use cases are never discrete, right? They're all interrelated. But the point is start small. And as I was talking earlier, treat that use case like a business case. So now you understand the value of that use case. You can start to think about what costs that means, what you need to do. And then your next question would be, okay, well, what does that mean about my data? How do I close the gap between the data I've got and the data I need in order to drive that value, right? So you can focus on proving out that use case and kind of moving from there. And that's often how we start. So you don't have to start big bang. It doesn't have to be big enterprise stuff. It can be zeroed in, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your stakeholders on board. Right? They need to, and fundamentally at board level, they need to see, the numbers help clearly, because you can put metrics in all of this, but you need to actually demonstrate a use case, how you get that working, how do you systemize it, what's the methodology, right? And you can do that through one use case. You can do it through a portfolio, but often we start with one.
Yeah, I think that's, honestly, it's wrapped up nicely, to be honest with you, in terms of what you do, how you do it, the process, the methodology, the benefits, the challenges, and obviously the advice there too. It's been absolutely pleasure talking to you about this stuff. It's a whistle-stop tour of a masterclass, to be honest. My last question, though, and I know we're discussing questions, and this is a personal thing. So data transformation for me, sometimes you see it used a lot in the market. It can be, it's kind of like big data,
Yeah.
The word big data. I hate using that word. I'm never going to use it again on this podcast, actually. So that's the last time we use it. From my perspective, I've got an idea what data transformation is, or digital transformation. Sometimes you can hear people say that too. But from my experience, what I see is a load of recruiters going on LinkedIn and call themselves AI data transformation specialists. And I'm like, you can't even spell AI, let alone know what data transformation is. That's me being cynical. Obviously, I'm sure some of them are very good at their jobs and know what they're doing. Before I get to the question, I want to know what your thoughts are on data. What is data transformation? Okay, and then the question would be, what's your view for the future of data transformation as well too?
Yeah, that's what a question. I've got to think on my feet here. What is data? And I should, what? This is my job title, Josh. So I should know what that is. But it means a lot of things to different people, doesn't it? I think generally speaking, we've been on a journey with transformation. Transformation for me is just progress and improvement. Right, really? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what I've seen my job has been the whole time. I've been an evangelist about data, not because I particularly care about data, actually, oddly enough. It's a weird thing to say. Not the zeros and ones. I care about what we can do with it, right? So I've been, even in my early jobs where I was working in analytics, and we were making investments in new stores, right? They cost about £1 million a time, ago, and you might be opening 50 of them. It's quite a lot of money, even in 25 years ago. But what I could see there was that we were making improvements the whole time with our data. We were improving our organization runs, and that's how I see transformation. And you can run at different speeds, and you can do that at different scales. Now, I think the challenge for me has been transformation to a lot of people means big bang stuff. Hire a load of consultants, hire a load of AI, Gen AI. We don't say prompt engineer anymore, do we? That died. Hire a load of AI people.
It changes on a weekly basis. We're already out of date. But that's what I get. So that's what I get from it. Honestly, I get hire a bunch of people. That's what that can't be what transformation is. And I think it's getting misused in the market, especially in my industry. You're not a data transformation specialist. You're a recruiter, and you want to build teams in the recruitment, in the data space. Exactly. That's that simple, So I'm really trying to figure out what it means. I'm trying to figure out, not to put you on the spot, and I think you put it well already. It is valuation yet again, but surely it means more than just building teams. Is there anything else that that you could glean from that?
Yeah, it's definitely more than that. I mean, building teams could well be part of it, right? But I think it's this is 100%. Fundamentally about it. I mentioned, and I keep going about the business of data. That's kind of what it is. It's about, how do we improve our organization? How do we be clear on what steps we're taking to improve our organization? And every I talked about that kind of business value chain, that should be front and center of your transformation. We're trying to drive X, Y, and Z in our business, make more money, be more productive. And you're going back and you're basically saying, all right, what do I need to do those things? What are my priorities? And this is a strategy, right? That's where a strategy comes in. And you need people, you need processes, and you need technology, like the classic triangle we talk about in transformation, to help you with all of those things. But for me, transformation needs to be way more intentional, actually, rather than just being a big old announcement to an organization. Right, we're having a digital transformation and we're going to do big things and we're all going to, set fire to stuff. It can't be like that. I mean, like I mentioned before, something like 80% of transformations of any kind just don't work, right? That tells you a lot, because it's been big bang. It's been seen as a massively expensive, thing to do.
Yeah. Is there a difference between digital and data transformation? Are they the same? Are the specifics around that terminology as well too?
So I would say they're two sides of a coin. So the reason we need data transformation is because because as organizations, we're all dealing with digital transformation. In actual fact, there's not a board on the planet that's not dealing with some type or form of digital transformation, because that's the world we live in. AI is obviously the latest, I suppose, version of it, or thing that's influencing it. But no, they're part of it. So for me, the digital side, generally speaking, tends to focus more on the technology. Now, that isn't, a lot of people will disagree with me, right, with that. But it's more about the infrastructure. It's more about it's more about the pipes, right, in an organization. Now, for me, data is what's in those pipes, right? And the two are together. That's why I'm totally mixing up metaphors, but or analogies, whatever I'm talking about here. But you end up really with two sides of a coin. You can't have digital transformation without data transformation. You can't be improving digital without improving data, because they come together, right? And the big thing is, the reason we're all sat here talking about data anyway is because the digital world we live in is producing so much data, right? All of the technology, all of the smartphones, all of whatever, the cloud, AI, everything is just producing a massive exhaust of information. And data is there to really say, well, what information do we need to make our decisions and actions? And that's why we need the data transformation part of that, is say, okay, as an organization, we're going to have to make faster decisions, best decisions, take faster actions. The technology necessitates this. Our customers expect it. What we're trying to do with data is make sure that information is in the right place at the right time, fundamentally. And it all goes back, though, and this is where the strategy is. It all goes back to, let's focus on what really matters, the priorities that matter, what drives the return on investment. And that takes you back to the asset management piece, because actually this asset management is both digital and data, right? It's just two sides of the coin. You can't do one without the other. I mean, other people who are a bit more, let's put it this way, academic will explain it in a different way. But for me, it's just about how do we explain this at a kind of business level, kind of relevant way.
No, that's perfect. It's a great summary. And sorry for putting you on the spot. It's more for my benefit, really. It's just another. I don't want the word data transformation to fall into the big data space, and sometimes I think it gets misused as well too in the market. So it's always good to redefine and reallocate, and obviously update the terminology as well too. But look, mate, absolutely running out of time. We're obviously fighting against technology as well too, ironically. We both look like PS1 characters on the video for some reason. I look like one in real life anyway, so it's not an issue.
So do I.
But look, James, no chance. Look, thanks again for your time and insight, and really appreciate the process you went through today. Where can our listeners, or dare I say, potential clients find you if they want to get in touch?
Well, of course you could say that. So there, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just put James Miller Data, and you'll probably. I've got one of those names, James Miller. There's loads of us, but you'll find me there. Also, feel free to look at Anmut. So if you need Anmut spelling out, it's ANMUT. So Anmut's the organisation. You'll find us there as well. But yeah, if you've got any questions about any of this or disagree with any of it, I'm always happy to take that. Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. I'll be there most days.
Perfect.